It all began on a summer afternoon in Charleston. The heat crept through the windows of the Morgan family home, a family that had lived in the same historic district for 3 generations. Eleanor, the 68-year-old matriarch, was preparing her weekly Sunday casserole, just as she did every week, while her son James arranged chairs in the backyard. The family tradition was never broken. Sundays were sacred. All the children and grandchildren had to show up for the meal, no excuses. It was the unwritten rule Eleanor had imposed after the death of her husband, Michael, 8 years prior. "Mom," Caroline called. "She says she's going to be a little late," James commented as he placed plates on the red checkered tablecloth. Eleanor didn't answer. She just pressed her lips together and continued stirring the casserole with more force than necessary. Caroline, her only daughter, was always late, always had an excuse, always different from the rest of the family. "Don't make that face, it'll only be 20 minutes, James insisted. "Your father didn't like tardiness," Eleanor replied curtly. The truth was, Caroline had been Michael's favorite, and Eleanor had never gotten over it. Every gesture of her daughter reminded her of her late husband. The same crooked smile, the same stubbornness, the same passion for photography. Perhaps that's why she found it so hard to forgive her any fault. At 2 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. The first to arrive were Mark and Lucy, Eleanor's eldest son with his wife, followed by their 2 teenage children, Martin and Paula. Then came James with his husband, Albert. The only one missing was Caroline. The table was set. The aroma of the casserole filled the patio, mingling with the scent of the live oak trees Michael had planted 20 years ago. The family chatted animatedly, avoiding any mention of the empty chair waiting for Caroline. "We should start now," Eleanor suggested, looking at her watch for the 3rd time. "The food will get cold." "Give her 5 more minutes, Mom," James pleaded, exchanging a knowing glance with his brother Mark. It was then that the doorbell rang again. Eleanor walked to the door with a firm step, prepared to unleash some acerbic comment about punctuality. But when she opened it, she froze. Caroline wasn't alone. Beside her, a man of about 40, tall and with tanned skin, held a bouquet of flowers. And behind them, a little girl of about 6, with large dark eyes and curly hair, hid shyly. "Hi, Mom," Caroline greeted with a nervous smile. "This is Robert. And this is Amelia, my daughter." The silence that followed was so dense it seemed to have a weight of its own. Eleanor looked at the girl, then at Robert, and finally at Caroline. Her expression was unreadable. "Your daughter?" Eleanor repeated, her voice barely audible. Caroline nodded, taking the little girl's hand. "We have a lot to tell you, Mom, but I wanted you to meet her. She's your granddaughter." Eleanor stood still as a statue, her hand still on the doorknob. 1,000 questions raced through her mind. When had this happened? Why had Caroline kept something so important a secret? Who was this man, really? From the end of the hallway, James peeked out to see what was causing the delay. Understanding the situation, he quickly approached. "Caroline," he exclaimed with a forced smile, hugging his sister. "And you must be Robert, right? Caroline has told us so much about you." It was a lie. Caroline had barely mentioned she was dating someone, without going into detail. And she had definitely never mentioned a daughter. "And this princess must be Amelia," James continued, crouching down to the girl's level. "I'm your Uncle James. Did you know I have 2 more nephews you can play with?" The girl smiled shyly, clinging to her mother's dress. Eleanor still didn't react. Her gaze was fixed on the little girl, searching her features for some family resemblance. She had Michael's smile, the same smile Caroline had inherited. "Come in," Eleanor finally said, stepping aside. "The food is getting cold." Those simple words momentarily broke the tension, but everyone knew it was just the beginning of a storm that had been brewing for years. In the yard, the rest of the family watched the newcomers with astonishment. Mark was the first to react, hugging Caroline and introducing himself to Robert with a cordiality that contrasted with Eleanor's coldness. During the meal, the conversation was uncomfortably polite. No one mentioned the elephant in the room, that Caroline had hidden the existence of a daughter for years. Instead, they talked about the weather, about football, about the latest news. Robert said he was a history professor at the university, while Caroline explained they had met on a trip to Mexico, where she had gone to photograph a traditional festival. Eleanor barely touched her plate. Her eyes constantly darted from Caroline to Amelia, and then to the photograph of Michael hanging on the patio wall. When it was time for dessert, Caroline took a deep breath and took Robert's hand across the table. "Family, there's something else we want to tell you," she announced. "Robert and I are getting married next month, and we'd like for all of you to be there." Eleanor dropped her spoon on the plate, causing a clatter that startled everyone. "Married?" she muttered. "After showing up like this, out of the blue, with a child you never introduced to us? Do you think you can just come to my house and drop this news like it's the most normal thing in the world?" Caroline paled. She had expected this reaction, but it still hurt. "Mom, I can explain everything." "Explain what?" Eleanor interrupted her, rising from her chair. "That you've had a daughter for years and didn't deign to tell me? That you've denied me knowing my own granddaughter?" Amelia began to cry, frightened by the shouting. Robert took her in his arms, whispering soothing words. "Maybe we should talk about this another time," Mark suggested, trying to calm things down. But it was too late. The bomb had exploded, and the secrets the Morgan family had kept buried for years were beginning to surface. Eleanor looked at the crying child, and something inside her broke. Without a word, she turned around and went into the house, leaving behind a silence that weighed more than all the unsaid words between mother and daughter. The afternoon that was supposed to be a family celebration had turned into a battlefield. Caroline remained seated in the yard, her gaze fixed on the door where her mother had disappeared. Robert, beside her, held Amelia, who had stopped crying but still clung to his neck. "I'm so sorry." Caroline apologized to the rest of the family. "I should have handled this differently." Mark approached and put a hand on her shoulder. "It's not your fault, Carrie. Mom has always been complicated." James appeared with a tray of coffees, trying to normalize the situation. His husband, Albert, played with Martin and Paula, trying to distract them from the tension hanging in the air. "I'm going to talk to her," Caroline announced, standing up. "I don't think that's a good idea right now," James warned. "It's been 6 years, James. I've waited too long." Caroline kissed Amelia on the forehead and promised to be back soon. Then she headed inside the house, following the path she had walked so many times in her childhood. The house smelled the same as always, of lemon, cinnamon, and the memories accumulated in every corner. She found Eleanor in the bedroom she had shared with Michael, sitting on the bed with an old box of photos open on her lap. She didn't look up when Caroline entered, but her shoulders tensed. "Mom, we need to talk." "Now you want to talk?" Eleanor replied without looking at her. After 6 years of lies, Caroline sat beside her, noticing that her mother was holding a photograph, herself at 16, smiling next to Michael in front of the low-country marshes. "They weren't lies, Mom. They were omissions, and I had my reasons." Eleanor let out a bitter laugh. "What reasons could justify hiding my granddaughter from me? Do you know how many times I've asked God why he didn't give me more grandchildren? And you had a daughter, hidden as if she were a shame." "It wasn't shame." Caroline took a breath, preparing for what she was about to say. "It was fear. Fear of your rejection, of your judgments." "My rejection? I'm your mother, Caroline. How could I reject my own blood? Do you really want me to remind you?" Caroline's voice hardened. "Do you want to talk about what happened when I told you I wanted to study photography instead of taking over the family business? Or when I told you I'd fallen in love with Robert, a divorced man with a child?" Eleanor remained silent. Those arguments had been brutal, full of reproaches and hurtful words. "Everything I said then was for your own good," Eleanor muttered finally. "No, Mom. It was for your pride. Because you can't stand me living my life differently from how you think I should." Eleanor slammed the photo box shut. "And what did you want me to do? Applaud while you threw away your father's legacy? Celebrate you running off with a man who had already failed at one marriage?" Robert didn't fail. His ex-wife died of cancer when Amelia was just a few months old. He raised her alone for almost 2 years before we met. He's the kindest, most honest man I've ever known, after Dad. The mention of Michael seemed to hit Eleanor like a slap. "Don't bring your father into this." "Why not?" Caroline stood up, facing her. "Dad would have supported me. He always let me make my own decisions, even when he didn't agree. Your father spoiled you too much. You were always his favorite. You always got your way. And look at you now, showing up out of nowhere with a ready-made family, as if we didn't matter." Caroline shook her head, frustrated. "It's not about favorites, Mom. It's about respect. Dad respected my choices because he trusted me. You never have." A heavy silence fell between them. Through the window, the laughter of children playing in the yard could be heard. Life went on outside, oblivious to the battle being waged in that room. I met Robert 7 years ago, Caroline continued in a softer voice. I fell in love not only with him, but also with Amelia. I legally adopted her when we moved in together. I wanted to tell you so many times. I even came to see you one Sunday, remember? When I got back from Mexico. Eleanor nodded slightly. She remembered that day. Caroline had been strangely nervous, as if she wanted to say something important. But Eleanor had spent the entire meal talking about the new curtains she had bought and how badly the neighbor's son was behaving. I tried to tell you then, but you didn't listen to me, as usual. And then, the more time passed, the harder it became. Until one day I realized it was easier to keep two separate lives. My life with Robert and Amelia in Austin, and my visits here, where I pretended nothing had changed. Eleanor looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Have I been such a terrible mother? Do you hate me that much? I don't hate you, Mom, Caroline replied softly. But I'm afraid of you. Afraid of your judgments, your expectations. Afraid of never being good enough for you. Outside, the front door opened. Voices were heard saying goodbye. Caroline looked out the window and saw Mark and Lucy getting their children into the car. They're leaving because of me, Eleanor murmured. No, Mom. They're leaving because it's late and because the family meal they expected turned into something different. But they can come back. We can all try again. Eleanor rose slowly and walked to the dresser. On it were several framed photographs. Her wedding to Michael, the birth of each of her children, the last Christmas they all spent together before Michael fell ill. Your father would be very disappointed in me, she said quietly. Caroline approached and stood beside her, looking at the same photographs. I don't think Dad expected you to be perfect, Mom. Just for you to be happy. How can I be happy if my own daughter doesn't trust me? We still have time to change that. Caroline took her mother's hand. Robert and Amelia are staying in Charleston this weekend. You could really get to know them, without surprises or expectations. Just give us a chance. Eleanor looked at her daughter, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. She saw the tiredness in her eyes, but also the determination. The same determination Michael showed when he believed in something with all his heart. She has your father's eyes, she said finally. Who? Amelia. She has the same eyes as Michael. It was the first thing I noticed when I saw her. Caroline smiled faintly, feeling something beginning to melt in the wall of ice that separated mother and daughter. Dad would have adored her. Yes, Eleanor admitted. He would have spoiled her terribly. For a moment, they both shared a knowing smile, remembering how Michael always showed up with surprise gifts for his grandchildren, much to Eleanor's despair as she tried to maintain some discipline. Are you really getting married? Eleanor asked after a while. Caroline nodded. Next month. It'll be something small, just family and close friends. On Isle of Palms, where Dad used to take us fishing. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, as if visualizing the scene. You'll need help with the preparations. It wasn't a question, nor a direct offer. It was simply Eleanor being Eleanor, taking control, finding her place in this new reality. I'd love your help, Mom, Caroline replied. Nobody organizes a celebration like you. Eleanor looked at the photographs again, pausing on one where Michael was holding a baby Mark. We'll have to buy Amelia a dress. And that man of yours will need a decent suit. Robert, Mom. His name is Robert. Robert, Eleanor repeated, as if testing the name. Well, we'd better get back to the yard before they think we've killed each other. Caroline smiled and hugged her mother. Eleanor remained stiff for a second before returning the hug, awkwardly at first, then more firmly. I've missed you, Mom, Caroline whispered. Eleanor didn't respond with words, but the way she held her daughter said more than any sentence. When they returned to the yard, only James, Albert, Robert, and Amelia remained. The girl had found an old swing Michael had built years ago, and James was pushing her gently as she laughed. The Saturday morning dawned bright in Charleston. Eleanor had woken at dawn, as always, to prepare breakfast. But this time it wasn't just any breakfast. She had squeezed fresh orange juice, made hot chocolate, and baked muffins, Caroline's favorite when she was little. Robert and Amelia had checked into a small hotel downtown, despite James's insistence that they stay at his apartment. Too many changes at once, Caroline had explained. We need to go slow. Eleanor was placing cups on the table when the doorbell rang. Opening the door, she found Amelia, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Good morning, ma'am, the girl greeted shyly. Mommy says these are your favorite flowers. Eleanor was momentarily speechless. Behind Amelia, Caroline and Robert waited on the sidewalk, giving the girls space for this first approach. "They're beautiful," Eleanor finally replied, crouching down to the little girl's level. "You know, when your mother was about your age, she used to pick daisies from the park and put them in my hair while I was cooking." Amelia smiled, revealing a small gap where a tooth was missing. "Can I put one on you now?" Eleanor nodded and leaned in. With delicate fingers, Amelia placed a daisy above the woman's ear. "Now you look pretty as a princess," the girl declared. Something definitely softened in Eleanor's heart. Without a second thought, she hugged her granddaughter for the first time. "You can call me Grandma," she whispered. Caroline watched the scene from a distance, her eyes moist. Robert squeezed her hand, understanding how important this moment was. Breakfast passed with a warmth the Morgan house hadn't known in years. Amelia told stories about her school in Austin, about her pet rabbit named Thumper, and about how Caroline was teaching her to take pictures with a real camera. "Did you know this house is full of photographs your mother took when she was little?" Eleanor commented. "Your grandpa Michael gave her her first camera when she was 10. Can we see them?" Amelia asked enthusiastically. Eleanor nodded and went to the hall closet, from which she pulled out several dusty albums. For the next hour, the four of them immersed themselves in memories captured on photographic paper. Caroline in her school uniform, the Morgan siblings at the beach, Michael teaching Caroline how to use the flash. "Dad always said you had a special eye," Eleanor commented, turning the pages carefully, "that you saw things the rest of us didn't notice." Caroline looked at her, surprised. It was the first time her mother had openly acknowledged the talent Michael had always encouraged. "You never told me that." Eleanor shrugged, somewhat uncomfortable. "I suppose I was too busy worrying about your future. Photography didn't seem practical. But Mommy makes a lot of money with her photos," Amelia chimed in with childish pride. "She's in magazines and everything." Robert smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. "Your mother is quite famous in certain circles," he explained to Eleanor. "Her photographs of indigenous communities in Latin America have won several awards." Eleanor looked at Caroline with genuine surprise. "Is that true? You never told me about awards." Caroline blushed slightly. "You never asked, Mom." An awkward silence fell over the table. So many unhad conversations, so many unasked questions over the years. "Well," said Robert, breaking the tension, "what do you say we take Amelia to the Charleston Aquarium today? She's never been there." "Yes," exclaimed the girl. "Can we see dolphins?" "And sharks, and jellyfish, and anything you want," Caroline assured her. "Mom, would you like to come with us?" Eleanor hesitated for a moment. It had been years since she had visited any tourist attraction in the city. "I have to do the shopping and clean." "That can wait," Caroline interrupted gently. "Today is a special day." To everyone's surprise, Eleanor accepted. The aquarium was full of families enjoying the weekend. Amelia ran from one tank to another, marveling at the colors and shapes of the fish. Robert followed her closely, while Caroline and Eleanor walked a few steps behind. "She's an extraordinary child," Eleanor commented, watching Amelia press her nose against the glass of a tank, fascinated by an octopus. "She looks a lot like you at her age." "Do you really think so?" Caroline asked. "I've always thought she's more like Robert, in her manner." Eleanor shook her head. "She has your curiosity, your way of noticing details, and definitely your smile." Caroline felt a lump in her throat. All her life, she had sought her mother's approval, and now she found it reflected in the way Eleanor looked at Amelia. "You know, I've never told you this, but I'm very proud of the work you've done," Eleanor continued, without looking at her directly. "Your photographs. I've seen them in some magazines. I didn't know they had won awards, but whenever I found one, I'd cut it out and save it." Caroline stopped in her tracks. "You've saved my photographs? But you always said it was a waste of time." Eleanor shrugged, visibly uncomfortable with the vulnerability she was showing. "I said many things I regret. Your father always told me I was too hard on you, that I would suffocate you with my expectations. But I just wanted to protect you. The world is difficult for a woman alone." "I wasn't alone, Mom. I had Robert and Amelia, and my friends, and my work. The only thing I was missing was my family." Eleanor nodded, accepting the implicit reproach. Further on, Amelia called them excitedly to see a shark passing right over their heads in a transparent tunnel. The rest of the day passed amidst laughter and small discoveries. Amelia convinced Eleanor to take a picture with her in front of a jellyfish tank, and then insisted on buying ice cream for everyone. Sitting on a bench facing the sea, with the sun beginning to set, Robert took a small box from his pocket. I know the wedding is a few weeks away, but there's something I'd like to do now, with family present, he said, looking first at Caroline and then at Eleanor. Caroline and I exchanged rings a while ago, but we never had a formal celebration. And now that we're here, in Charleston, where she grew up, he knelt before Caroline, who looked at him with shining eyes. Caroline Morgan, would you do me the honor of officially being my wife, in front of your mother and our daughter? Caroline nodded, unable to speak. Robert slid a gold ring with a small blue stone onto her finger. It was my grandmother's, he explained to Eleanor. It has passed through 3 generations of strong women in my family. Now it belongs to Caroline. Eleanor watched the scene in silence. There was something in the way Robert looked at Caroline that powerfully reminded her of Michael. The same respect, the same sincere admiration. That night, after Caroline, Robert, and Amelia had said goodbye with the promise of returning the next day for the family meal, Eleanor sat in Michael's armchair in the living room. The house seemed different somehow, more alive. She took an old folder from a drawer. Inside, carefully organized by date, were all the magazine and newspaper clippings she had collected over the years, photographs taken by Caroline in different parts of the world. Indigenous people in Mexico, fishermen in Colombia, markets in Peru. Next to the folder, she placed the family album they had been looking at that morning. 2 worlds that were finally beginning to meet. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. It was James. Mom, how did everything go today? Caroline sent me a message. She seemed happy. It was a good day. Eleanor replied simply. Are you okay with all this? With the wedding, with Amelia? Eleanor reflected for a moment before answering. I'm learning, son. Learning to listen more and judge less. Your father would be proud of all of you, you know? Of the family you've built, each in your own way. On the other end of the line, James was silent, surprised by the unusual vulnerability in his mother's voice. He'd be proud of you too, Mom, he said finally. For trying. After hanging up, Eleanor looked at Michael's photograph above the fireplace. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the crushing weight of absence, but a strange peace. You were right, you stubborn old goat, she murmured to the photograph. She always knew what she was doing. Outside, the wind gently moved the branches of the live oak tree, and the scent of its blossoms wafted through the open window. Somewhere in Charleston, her family was growing again, taking forms she had never imagined. The following week brought a frenzy of activity to the Morgan house. Eleanor had taken on the wedding preparations as a personal mission, transforming the dining room into a makeshift headquarters filled with lists, fabric swatches, and flower catalogs. Mom, I told you we wanted something simple, Caroline protested as she looked at the elaborate centerpiece designs her mother had sketched. Just a small ceremony on the beach. Eleanor looked up from her notebook, adjusting her reading glasses. Simple doesn't mean sloppy, Caroline. If we're going to do it, we have to do it right. Robert, who had come to pick up Caroline after his day at the university, smiled at the exchange. In just a week, he had learned to navigate the turbulent waters of the mother-daughter relationship. Eleanor is right, he intervened, earning a look of betrayal from Caroline. Even if it's intimate, it deserves to be special. Besides, Amelia is thrilled with the idea of wearing flowers in her hair, like the ones she's seen in your sketches. Eleanor gave him a grateful smile. Despite her initial resistance, she had developed a growing respect for this man who so evidently loved her daughter and granddaughter. Where's my princess? Robert asked, noticing Amelia's absence. In the yard, with James, Eleanor replied. They're watering the live oaks. Caroline peeked through the window and saw her brother lifting Amelia so she could reach the highest branches. The girl was laughing uproariously as water from the watering can splash them both. James will be a wonderful godfather, Caroline commented. Eleanor nodded, satisfied with the choice. James had been the first to build bridges when the family threatened to fracture. He had always been like that, since he was little, the conciliator, the one who kept the peace. Have you spoken to Mark? Eleanor asked cautiously. He hasn't been here all week. Caroline sighed. Her relationship with her older brother had always been more distant. Mark had inherited Eleanor's practical and, at times, inflexible nature. I called him yesterday. He says he has a lot of work, but he'll come on Sunday. Robert noticed the tension in Caroline's voice and quickly changed the subject. By the way, Eleanor, I wanted to ask you about the menu. Caroline told me you make the best seafood pasta in Charleston. Eleanor's face lit up at the compliment. The recipe comes from my grandmother. I taught it to Caroline when she was 12, but she never had the patience for cooking. She preferred photographing the food to preparing it, Caroline joked. Well, I think it would be perfect for the dinner after the ceremony, Robert continued. Something traditional, Charlestonian. My parents are coming from New Orleans and have never tried authentic homemade seafood pasta. Eleanor sat up straighter in her chair, suddenly alert. Your parents are coming to the wedding? Robert exchanged a glance with Caroline before answering. Yes, they'll arrive on Friday. They're older, but my father insisted on meeting the woman who has made his son so happy. An uncomfortable silence settled in the room. Eleanor hadn't considered that there would be another family involved, another grandmother for Amelia, other in-laws for Caroline. I understand, she said finally. I suppose they'll want to stay in a good hotel. The Westin has lovely views of Waterfront Park. Actually, Caroline intervened. We've offered for them to stay here. The house is large, and we thought it would be good for the families to get to know each other before the ceremony. Eleanor visibly paled. Here? But there's so much to do. The house isn't ready for guests, and We can help you prepare everything, Robert reassured her. My parents are very simple people, I assure you. My father was a literature professor at the university, like me, and my mother worked as a nurse before she retired. Eleanor stood up and began to nervously arrange the papers on the table. I'll have to change the sheets in the guest room, and deep clean the hall bathroom, and buy more food. And, Mom, Caroline interrupted her gently, placing a hand on her arm. You don't have to impress anyone. They're good people, and you'll like them, I promise. Eleanor stopped and looked at her daughter with a vulnerability she rarely showed. It's been so long since I've had visitors. Since your father, she didn't finish the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. Everyone knew the Morgan house had ceased to be an open home after Michael's death. That's precisely why I think it's a good idea, Caroline said. This house needs to be filled with life again. The doorbell rang, interrupting the conversation. James entered with Amelia in his arms, both soaked and smiling. Surprise visit, James announced. Look who's here. Behind him appeared Mark, with a bouquet of flowers and a contrite expression on his face. Hi, family, he greeted shyly. I was passing by and thought I'd say hello. Caroline approached her brother and hugged him, ignoring his initial stiffness. I'm glad you came. Eleanor watched the reunion with a mixture of relief and hope. Perhaps, after all, the family could heal its wounds. Mark crouched down to greet Amelia, whom he had only seen briefly during the tense family meal. So you're the famous Amelia, he said with a smile. My kids won't stop talking about their new cousin. Martin says you're very good at climbing trees. Amelia nodded proudly. I taught him how to climb the live oak. Uncle James said we could, but not to tell Grandma. Everyone laughed, including Eleanor, who feigned indignation. James Morgan, have you been letting this child climb my live oaks? James held up his hands in surrender. Guilty, but you should see her, Mom. She's as agile as a monkey. The rest of the afternoon passed with a warmth that surprised everyone. Mark had brought wine and stayed for dinner. While the adults chatted in the dining room, Amelia fell asleep on the living room sofa, exhausted after a day full of emotions. We should take her to the hotel, Robert suggested, looking at the clock. Why don't you stay here tonight? Eleanor proposed, to everyone's surprise. Her room is ready, and Amelia is already asleep. It would be a shame to wake her. Caroline looked at her mother in amazement. It was the first time Eleanor had invited them to spend the night since they had arrived in Charleston. Are you sure, Mom? Eleanor nodded. Completely. Besides, tomorrow we have to go see the dress you've chosen, and it will be easier if you're already here. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Eleanor found herself wandering through the dimly lit house. She stopped in front of the door of what had been Caroline's room during her childhood and adolescence, and where her daughter and Robert now slept. Next door, in James's old room, Amelia rested surrounded by the old stuffed animals Eleanor had kept all these years. The house felt different with them there. Warmer, more alive. For a long time, Eleanor had clung to the past, freezing each room like a museum of what once was. But now, new voices, new laughter, and new memories were beginning to fill the empty spaces. She went to the kitchen and was surprised to find Robert sitting at the table, a cup of tea in his hands. "I'm sorry," he apologized. "I couldn't sleep." "Neither can I," Eleanor admitted, putting water on to heat for an infusion. "I never sleep well when there's a full moon." They sat in silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. It was Robert who finally spoke. "I wanted to thank you, Eleanor. I know all this hasn't been easy for you." Eleanor looked at him curiously. "What are you referring to exactly?" "Accepting us, Amelia and me. Forgiving Caroline for hiding our existence from you for so long." Eleanor took a sip of her tea before answering. "You know, when Michael died, I thought my life was over. For years, I lived as if it were. But these days," she paused, searching for the words. "These days I've realized that maybe I was wrong. That life goes on, in ways I didn't expect." Robert nodded, understanding. "When I lost Isabel, Amelia's mother, I thought I'd never be happy again. I had a baby girl. I was alone and terrified. But then I met Caroline, and everything changed. My daughter has that effect on people," Eleanor commented with a small smile. "She was always able to light up a room just by entering it. Like her father. She talks a lot about him. About Michael. She says he was an extraordinary man." "He was," Eleanor confirmed, her gaze lost in memories. "He loved life like few others. And he adored his children, especially Caroline. He always said she had a free spirit, that we shouldn't try to tie her down." "That's good advice." Eleanor sighed. "Yes, it is. Too bad I didn't know how to listen to it until it was too late." Robert leaned forward, his expression serious. "It's never too late, Eleanor. Believe me. The important thing is that we're here now, all together." Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. She saw a sincere man, with worry lines on his forehead and tired but kind eyes. A man who loved her daughter and her granddaughter, and who was willing to build bridges where she had only seen chasms. "You're right," she conceded finally. "And now you should go to sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Eleanor paused in front of Michael's photograph that presided over the hallway. "You were right, you stubborn old goat," she murmured. "Our daughter found her way, after all." The next morning, breakfast was an organized chaos of laughter, burnt toast, and plans for the day. Mark had promised to return with his family to help with the preparations, and James was enthusiastically talking about the music for the ceremony. "I thought we could play some guitar," he suggested. "Like when we were little and Dad taught us songs in the yard." Caroline nodded, excited by the idea. "Robert loves the guitar too. Right, honey?" Robert, who was helping Amelia spread jam on her toast, looked up with a smile. "I can hold my own, though I don't know if I'm up to playing at a wedding." "Nonsense," Eleanor intervened. "Michael always said that improvised music is the music that comes from the heart. And that's what matters." Friday arrived faster than Eleanor had expected. Since dawn, the house was a hive of activity. James and Albert had come early to help with the final preparations, and Mark had taken charge of picking up Robert's parents from the airport. Eleanor moved from room to room, checking that everything was perfect. She had changed the curtains, polished the family silver she rarely used, and even bought fresh flowers for every corner of the house. Caroline watched her with a mixture of amusement and concern. "Mom, relax a little. They're normal people, not the royal family." Eleanor shot her a reproachful look as she smoothed a tablecloth that was already perfectly ironed. "I want everything to be right. It's important." Caroline approached and took her mother's hands, stopping her frantic activity. "The important thing is that we meet, that we talk. Wrinkles in the tablecloth don't matter." Eleanor sighed, recognizing the truth in her daughter's words. "It's just that it's been so long since we've had important visitors. Since your father got sick, the house became so quiet." "I know, Mom." Caroline gently squeezed her hands. "But that's changing, and it's a good thing." The doorbell rang, interrupting the moment. Amelia ran to the door, followed by Robert, who reminded her to wait for an adult to open it. "It's Grandma and Grandpa," the girl exclaimed, jumping with excitement. Eleanor took a deep breath and smoothed the blue dress she had chosen for the occasion. Caroline gave her one last squeeze of the hand before also heading towards the entrance. The door opened to reveal a smiling elderly couple alongside Mark, who was carrying their suitcases. Anthony and Patricia Davies seemed as nervous as Eleanor herself, but their faces lit up when they saw Amelia running towards them. "Grandpa, Grandma, the girl cried, throwing herself into Anthony's arms, a tall, thin man with a thick white beard. My little scientist, he replied, lifting her in the air. Have you been doing experiments while we were away? Amelia nodded enthusiastically. I planted live oak seeds with Grandma Eleanor. And we also made cookies that turned into charcoal. Everyone laughed, and the initial tension began to dissipate. Robert formally introduced his parents to Eleanor, who invited them in with a warmth that surprised even Caroline. Patricia, a petite woman with lively eyes and silver hair pulled back in a bun, took Eleanor's hands in hers. You don't know how long I've waited to meet you, she said sincerely. Caroline and Amelia speak wonders of you. Eleanor, momentarily flustered by the affectionate welcome, stammered, Of me? But I've barely. Oh, yes, Patricia continued as they entered the living room. Caroline always tells us how strong you are, how you raised your family after being widowed. That's something I admire deeply. Eleanor looked at Caroline, who returned a shy smile. She had never imagined her daughter speaking of her with such respect to her other family, especially considering their differences over the years. The meal passed with a camaraderie none had anticipated. Anthony turned out to be a fascinating conversationalist, full of anecdotes about his years as a professor. Patricia complimented his stories with witty comments that made everyone laugh, especially Amelia. You know, Anthony commented as they enjoyed dessert. When Robert told us he had met someone special, we weren't surprised. He was always a hopeless romantic, since he was a boy. What did surprise us was how quickly Caroline won Amelia's heart. That child didn't trust anyone easily after losing her mother. Caroline, sitting next to Robert, squeezed his hand under the table. It was mutual, she replied. Amelia won me over from the first moment. Just like her father, Patricia added with a mischievous smile, making Robert blush. Eleanor observed the exchange with a new perspective. For years, she had imagined Caroline leading a completely separate life, almost as if she had two identities. But now she saw that it wasn't so. Her daughter had built a bridge between her two worlds, even if she hadn't perceived it. After the meal, while the men helped clear the table, Eleanor and Patricia found themselves alone in the kitchen. You have a beautiful home, Patricia commented, drying the dishes Eleanor washed. You can tell there's a lot of love in these walls. Thank you, Eleanor replied. It's been the Morgan family home for decades. Michael, my husband, inherited the house from his parents, and we raised our children here. Patricia nodded, contemplating the family photographs that decorated the kitchen walls. It must have been very hard to lose him, she said softly. I don't know what I'd do without my Anthony, after 50 years together. Eleanor paused for a moment, her hands submerged in the soapy water. It was as if the world stopped, she admitted. For a long time, I just existed on autopilot. For the children, for the house. But I wasn't really living. Patricia placed a hand on her shoulder. I understand perfectly. When we lost Isabel, Amelia's mother, it was devastating. She was like a daughter to us. Robert was heartbroken, and we didn't know how to help him with his grief and with such a small baby. Caroline never told me exactly how she died, Eleanor said cautiously. Leukemia, Patricia replied. It was very fast. She was diagnosed when she was pregnant with Amelia, but decided not to receive treatment until after the birth so as not to harm the baby. By the time Amelia was born, the disease was very advanced. Eleanor felt a lump in her throat. She couldn't imagine a more courageous and heartbreaking decision. I'm so sorry. It was a dark time, Patricia continued. But then Caroline appeared, with her camera and her smile. First as Robert's friend, then as something more. She brought light back into our lives. Eleanor had never thought of Caroline as someone who could heal others' pain. She had always seen her as her little girl, the one who needed protection and guidance. But now she understood that Caroline had grown to become a pillar for others, just as Michael had been for his family. She was always special, Eleanor murmured. Different from her brothers. More independent. A quality Robert greatly admires in her, Patricia assured. He says he's never met anyone with such a passion for life. In the living room, Amelia's laughter mingled with the voices of the adults. Through the half-open door, Eleanor could see Caroline sitting on the floor next to the girl, helping her build something with colorful blocks. Robert watched them with evident adoration while chatting with Anthony and Mark. You know, Eleanor confessed, for years I feared Caroline would never find her place in the world. Always searching, always restless. I worried she'd never settle down. Patricia smiled with understanding. Sometimes, children have to walk their own path to find their home. And it's not always the one we imagine for them. Michael used to say something similar, Eleanor recalled, that we should let our children spread their wings, even if they flew far from us. A wise man, from what I see. The conversation was interrupted by James's arrival, who entered the kitchen with an expression of mock indignation. May I ask what the two grandmothers are doing hiding in the kitchen? Anthony is telling stories about when Robert was a teenager, and you won't want to miss them. Patricia laughed and left the dish towel on the counter. I wouldn't miss that for the world. The anecdotes from my son's adolescence are pure gold. Eleanor finished drying her hands and followed Patricia and James to the living room. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, so different from the tense family gatherings of recent years. She saw Anthony gesturing broadly as he narrated how a young Robert had tried to impress a girl by reciting poetry in the town square, only to realize too late that he had memorized an obscure poem that no one in New Orleans understood. Everyone laughed, even Robert, who pretended to be mortified by the revelation. Caroline hugged him, resting her head on his shoulder, while Amelia listened with wide eyes, fascinated by the stories of her father as a boy. Eleanor took a seat next to Mark, who offered her a cup of freshly brewed coffee. Everything okay, Mom? He asked in a low voice. Eleanor nodded, contemplating the scene before her. Better than okay, she replied. I think this house needed this. New laughter, new stories. Mark followed her gaze and smiled. Dad would be delighted. He always said that a house without laughter is just a building. The afternoon turned into evening, and the conversation continued to flow naturally. Anthony took an old photo album from his suitcase, and soon everyone was gathered around, commenting on pictures of a teenage Robert with long hair and a sullen face. I went through a rebellious phase, he defended himself amidst laughter. Phase? Patricia joked. It lasted 5 years. Caroline looked at the photographs with fascination, discovering facets of Robert she didn't know. Eleanor, for her part, surprised herself by sharing anecdotes from Caroline's childhood, bringing up memories she had kept locked away for years. Once, when she was 8, she decided she wanted to be an underwater photographer, Eleanor recounted, to everyone's delight. She wrapped her father's toy camera in plastic bags and submerged it in the bathtub. Naturally, the camera was ruined, but she was so convinced of her invention that Michael had to buy her another one. Mom, Caroline protested, though she was smiling. Don't tell my disastrous stories. Oh, but I've barely begun, Eleanor replied with a mischievous twinkle in her eyes that she hadn't shown in years. The night progressed with stories, laughter, and plans for the big day. When everyone finally began to retire to their rooms, Eleanor found herself helping Amelia get ready for bed, while Caroline finished showing Patricia the wedding photos she had been selecting. Grandma Eleanor, Amelia said as she got into bed. Do you know what the best thing about having two grandmas is? Eleanor smiled, tucking her in carefully. What, sweetie? That there are double the hugs, double the stories, and double the cookies, the girl replied with absolute seriousness. Eleanor laughed softly and kissed her granddaughter's forehead. You're a very wise little girl, Amelia Morgan Davies. Davies Morgan, the little one corrected. Daddy says Mommy's last name goes first because it sounds better that way. Eleanor felt an unexpected surge of emotion at the small detail. That Robert had chosen to put the Morgan name first was a gesture that meant much more than it seemed at first glance. Your daddy is a very smart man, Eleanor whispered, turning off the nightstand lamp. When she left the room, she met Caroline in the hallway. Is she asleep yet? Her daughter asked. Almost. She was just explaining the advantages of having two grandmas. The wedding morning dawned with a clear sky and a gentle sea breeze, as if nature itself wanted to bless the union. Eleanor woke before dawn, as always, but this time it wasn't to prepare breakfast or clean the house. She sat in front of the vanity she had shared with Michael for over 30 years and contemplated her reflection in the mirror. Today was the day her only daughter would marry. A day she had imagined many times over the years, though never like this, never after so much time and so many misunderstandings. She carefully combed her silver hair and applied a touch of makeup, something she rarely did since Michael's death. From the top drawer, she took out a small blue velvet box. Inside rested a set of pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother, and which she herself had worn on her wedding day. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she said, turning to see who it was. Caroline peeked her head in, already dressed in a white silk robe. Her hair was gathered in a makeshift bun, and her face, free of makeup, reflected a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Good morning, Mom. May I come in?" Eleanor nodded, motioning for her to sit on the bed. For a few moments, neither spoke. It was one of those moments when words seem insufficient. "Nervous?" Eleanor finally asked. Caroline smiled. "A little, though after 7 years together, it seems almost ridiculous." "Marriage is never ridiculous," Eleanor replied softly. "It's a lifelong commitment. Like yours with Dad," Caroline added. Eleanor nodded, feeling the familiar pang of pain that always accompanied memories of Michael. 42 years, she murmured. "And they felt like a sigh? Every day with your father was a gift, even the difficult ones." Caroline approached and took her mother's hands in hers. "I want what you and Dad had," she confessed. "That love that withstood everything, that grew with the years instead of wearing out." Eleanor squeezed her daughter's hands and smiled nostalgically. "You'll have it. You already do. I've seen how Robert looks at you, how he listens to you. It's the same way Michael looked at me." Caroline felt her eyes fill with tears. "Mom, there's something I wanted to give you." She took a small box wrapped in silver paper from her robe pocket and handed it to Eleanor. Inside was a silver locket with a small frame containing a miniature photograph. Michael holding a baby Caroline in his arms, both smiling at the camera. "I found it among Dad's old negatives," Caroline explained. "I thought you'd like to wear it today." Eleanor contemplated the image with moist eyes. She remembered that day perfectly. Michael had been so proud of his little daughter, so sure she would do great things in life. "It's perfect," she murmured, placing the locket around her neck. "Thank you, daughter." She stood up and took the blue velvet box from the vanity. "And I have something for you," she said, opening it to show the pearl earrings. "I wore them at my wedding and my mother at hers. I'd like you to wear them today." Caroline looked at them in amazement. She knew how much they meant to her mother. "They're beautiful, Mom. Something borrowed and something old, all in one." Eleanor smiled, helping her put them on. At that moment, the door burst open and Amelia ran in, followed by Patricia, who was trying in vain to keep the girl still to finish combing her hair. "Mommy, Grandma, it's almost time," the little one exclaimed, twirling around the room in her lavender dress. "Aunt Lucy is already here with the cousins, and Uncle James is playing the guitar in the yard." The two women laughed at the girl's enthusiasm. Patricia shrugged with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, she's impossible to contain today." "No problem," Eleanor replied. "Excitement is contagious." Amelia stopped in front of Caroline and looked at her with large, solemn eyes. "You look very pretty, Mommy. Like a princess." Caroline crouched down to hug her. "And you look beautiful, my love. Ready to carry the flowers." Amelia nodded enthusiastically, showing the small basket hanging from her arm. "Grandpa Anthony taught me how I should walk, slowly and throwing the petals, one by one." The three women exchanged knowing glances. The wedding, which had started as a simple event, had turned into a full-blown family celebration. The original idea of a small ceremony on the beach had evolved into a celebration in the garden of Eleanor's house, followed by a reception on the beach at sunset. As the morning progressed, the house filled with activity. Mark and Lucy helped set up chairs in the yard, while their children, Martin and Paula, played with Amelia among the live oaks. James and Albert had set up a small altar under the oldest tree in the garden, decorated with garlands of white flowers and blue ribbons. Caroline was getting ready in her old room, helped by Lucy and a photographer friend who had come from Austin. Her dress was simple yet elegant, an ivory silk design that fell in soft folds to her feet, with small embroidered details on the bodice. She had chosen to wear her hair down, adorned only with a crown of small white flowers. Eleanor, meanwhile, supervised the final details in the garden. She had placed family photographs on a table near the entrance. Michael with the children, Caroline as a little girl with her first camera, baby Amelia in Robert's arms. A mosaic of memories that told the story of two families about to officially unite. Anthony approached her, observing the photographs with interest. "What a lovely idea, Eleanor," he commented. "It's like having everyone present, even those who are no longer physically here." Eleanor nodded, grateful for the comment. Michael always said that photographs are windows to the past. I think he would have liked to be here in some way. He is, Anthony assured her softly. In each of you. In this house you built together, in Caroline's smile. The music began to play, a soft guitar melody performed by James. The guests, a small but significant group of family and close friends, took their seats. Robert waited under the live oak, visibly emotional, with Mark by his side as his witness. Eleanor returned to the house to accompany Caroline. She found her standing in front of her bedroom window, contemplating the garden where the ceremony was to be held. "It's time, honey," she said softly. Caroline turned, and Eleanor held her breath. Her daughter had never looked as beautiful as she did at that moment, radiant with happiness and expectation. "Will you walk me down the aisle, Mom?" Caroline asked. "I know it's traditionally the father, but I'd love to," Eleanor replied, her voice breaking with emotion. They went down the stairs together, where Amelia waited with her basket of petals. The girl looked at them with admiration. "Grandma, you look beautiful," she exclaimed, observing Eleanor's elegant blue dress. Eleanor smiled and took Amelia's free hand. "Come on, little one. Your job is very important." The ceremony was as beautiful as it was simple. Amelia walked first, scattering petals with concentration. Then, Eleanor and Caroline advanced together down the improvised aisle between the chairs, under the dappled shade of the live oaks, and to the sound of James's guitar. When they reached Robert, Eleanor took her daughter's hand and placed it in his, in a gesture as ancient as it was significant. Their gazes met briefly, wordlessly communicating everything they had been through to reach this moment. The officiant, a family friend, conducted an emotional and personal ceremony. Caroline and Robert exchanged vows they had written themselves, sincere words about the journey taken and the one that lay ahead. Amelia participated by presenting the rings, proud of her role in her parents' official union. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the garden erupted in applause and cheers. Amelia was the first to run and hug them, creating an image Eleanor knew she would cherish in her heart forever. Her daughter, radiant with happiness, surrounded by the arms of her new family. The celebration continued with a luncheon in the yard, where the two families shared traditional Charleston dishes prepared by Eleanor and Patricia. The seafood pasta was, as Robert had predicted, a resounding success among the guests from New Orleans, who had never tasted anything like it. As the sun began to set, everyone moved to Isle of Palms to continue the celebration. They had set up a small tent with tables and lights, and the sea breeze brought a pleasant coolness to the warm summer evening. Eleanor found herself sitting by the water, watching Caroline and Robert dance barefoot on the sand, while Amelia and the other children ran around, chasing the waves. Beside her, Patricia contemplated the same scene with equal satisfaction. "We've done a good job, don't you think?" Patricia commented. Eleanor nodded, understanding perfectly what she meant. "They did the work," she replied. "We just gave them the tools, even if we sometimes made mistakes in how we did it. That's what being a parent is like," Patricia philosophized. "A series of mistakes and attempts, hoping that in the end, the successes outweigh the failures." Mark approached with 2 glasses of champagne and offered them. "What are the grandmothers talking about?" he asked with a smile. "About life, son," Eleanor replied, accepting the glass. "About how it turns and sometimes takes you exactly where you need to be, even if it's not where you expected." Mark looked towards where his sister danced with Robert, and then at his own children, who were building a sandcastle with Amelia. "Dad would be proud today," he said quietly. "Of all of us." Eleanor felt a tear slide down her cheek, but this time it wasn't of sadness. "Yes," she affirmed with certainty. "He would be."